My name is Whillamina Wise. I study Spanish and International Studies here at Southern Oregon University. I apologize for any croakiness this morning. The smoke decided to steal my voice right in time for this. My research this summer has focused on the construction of illegality and undocumented Latina women and how these identities overlap with the experience of intimate partner violence, or IPV. Next slide, please. So firstly, importance. Why is this topic worth studying? The unique health vulnerabilities of occupying a position of precarious or illegal documentation status have been widely researched throughout multiple social science disciplines, but the intersection of this experience with IPV is less understood. The multiple layers of risk associated with being undocumented, being a woman, and being Latina present both magnifying danger in IPV situations, as well as added difficulties in accessing assistance. In the United States, this has metastasized as higher rates, as well as more serious negative health outcomes for IPV for this group, including, unfortunately, increased rates of intimate partner homicide. Despite this, there remains a dearth of research specifically accounting for the effects of undocumented status as it intersects with IPV. Much of the healthcare and social science-oriented research has tended to assign these increased negative outcomes to cultural factors. I can test throughout my research that this disparity has more to do with the undocumented immigration process than these so-called cultural factors. This issue particularly needs attention currently because intimate partner violence rates have increased across the board due to COVID-19, and the specific impacts for this demographic group remain largely unknown. Next slide. So on to my theoretical lens. I employed a lens of critical border studies and Chicana feminist theory, particularly the concept of borders as ongoing social processes that affect not only material resources and political standing for this group, but also heavily affect the private sphere. The immigrant woman's body as a site of biopolitical violence as it intersects with interpersonal violence is a pervasive theoretical posit throughout my research. As you'll see, I have drawn from multiple disciplines for this research, and the reason for this is to determine how scholarly findings within each of these disciplines are interpreted and integrated into a cohesive, or chaotic, as the case may be, policy strategy, such that they will be of benefit to the women affected. I believe that the pursuit of the social sciences is most valuable when based in advocacy, and I hope to expand my research such that it can be applied in the near future. Next. So on to my methodology. The methodology I used within this research was a literature review methodology. Several parameters were set to ensure reliable and pertinent information was gathered. Firstly, all literature considered was published after 2001 to ensure applicability to the post-9/11 political and legal context. Secondly, all literature gathered was peer-reviewed to ensure efficacy of information. And lastly, all literature reviewed was specific to immigrant Latina women, not immigrant women in general, as I believe this is an important distinction. The articles reviewed included papers published within a wide range of disciplines: public health, law, anthropology, sociology, and social work. Next. So on to results. Next, please. Okay, so here's a graphic that shows the multiple facets of difficulty experienced by Latina immigrant women in IPV situations. They are subject not only to increased vulnerability to IPV, but also they exist under a system that does not provide adequate help to them. So if they find themselves experiencing IPV, their options are even more limited, as you can see from this infographic. Next, please. So firstly, we'll talk about augmented experiences. Several risk factors related to the social status and ongoing biopolitical process of undocumented immigration exist that place Latina immigrant women at a heightened risk for experiencing IPV, as well as enable unique means of abuse. Firstly, the literature demonstrates isolation as a significant risk factor, as well as a deterrent to help seeking. Isolation is common within this group, both because of the geographic separation from family and country of origin, and also because of the marginalization that undocumented immigrants are subject to in the United States. Secondly, the limited employment opportunities afforded individuals who do not possess U.S. Social Security numbers often increase unemployment, which has been identified as a risk factor in and of itself. When unemployment is present in male partners, it has been demonstrated to be a risk factor for IPV, as well as male alcohol consumption, which is a risk factor as well. Beyond amplification of risk, Latina women are susceptible to unique methods of abuse pertaining to their citizenship status and identity. Latinas may be faced with threats of deportation or criminal penalty that their unfamiliarity with the US legal system, as well as anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy, serve to legitimize. In this instance, the intersection of undocumented status and IPV is very clear. Next slide, please. So next on to help seeking. Help seeking can be broadly categorized into formal and informal help seeking. Immigrant Latina women experience added difficulty in accessing both options. Isolation from family and friends, as well as immersion in a foreign country, may make informal help seeking more difficult. And as for formal modes of assistance, such as legal intervention or social services, there exist both perceptive and systemic barriers that make access very difficult for this group. Perceptive barriers stem from the racialized mistreatment of immigrants by legal agencies such as law and border enforcement, as well as the increasingly hostile public attitude towards immigrants from Latin America. These factors create justifiable fears for women that deter them from seeking legal intervention, especially if threats of deportation are utilized by abusers. Much of the research also cites the dismissal of IPV cases or particularly lax enforcement in countries of origin, such as Mexico, as a perceptive deterrent to formal help seeking. Then we have systemic barriers to help seeking. There are limited social services available for undocumented immigrants. Public aid, shelters, and legal agencies that serve this group are few and far between. For this and many other reasons, undocumented Latina women may wish to legitimize their legal status to have more comprehensive access to help. This becomes very difficult when the citizenship is dependent on legal or permanent resident status petitions, which is often the case. A woman may feel even more trapped in a cycle of violence when her own citizenship and potentially that of her children is dependent on an abusive spouse in some capacity. Next slide, please. So does there exist a path to citizenship that bypasses spousal petitions in IPV cases? Yes, under the VAWA and TVPA visa. However, even in the most ideal scenarios, the amount of time, money, and knowledge of the US immigration system needed to achieve legality through these means is tremendous. And in intimate partner violence situations, particularly, all of those resources are very limited. So it's almost an impossible task. So on to discussion. It is necessary for help providing agencies to engage with Latin immigrant communities in a manner that is bilingual, bicultural, and accommodates the difficulties surrounding lack of documentation and legal status, instead of providing help that is often inaccessible, such as the recommendation of interfacing with police or attending weekly therapy sessions that is often given to women seeking independent citizenship. And within a research context, I believe more focus should be given to the role of applied legality on the experiences of these women, especially in healthcare research, where many of the observed vulnerabilities and barriers are attributed to culture, which is a misassignment of responsibility, as my research demonstrates. Now on to acknowledgements. I would like to acknowledge my mentor, Dr. Jessica Bakailik, who has and continues to be an invaluable resource, as well as the McNair Post-Bachelorette Achievement Program, and our amazing staff here at Southern Oregon University, Dr. Southard and Naomi, have both worked tirelessly to support all of us. And our reference librarian here at Southern Oregon University, Kate Cleland Zipfli, who is an amazing resource for all things information. And now on to questions. If anybody has a question, I believe that Dee is wanting you.
I was going to say if Dr. Pakailik would like to ask a question, if she would just unmute herself, she could ask a question of Whillamina.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Stacy. I do have a question if I could.
Yeah.
Do you know how La Clinica and health communities such as that actually promote integration of varying cultures? How are they able to help? Are they helping? Is there any statistics on if they're able to get resources and help for people that are undocumented?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I haven't worked with La Clinica or any local agencies specifically, but certainly help providing agencies through healthcare are providing assistance. I don't want to paint the picture that nothing is being done to remedy the situation, but it's just a matter of kind of the bigger picture and nationwide. These agencies, I really don't, I'm not super familiar with La Clinica, but if they are catering specifically to undocumented immigrants, it's a bit of a rarity. So does that answer your question?
To an extent, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Whillamina, my name is Jody Waters. I'm the Associate Provost, and I'm really impressed by your research. And it's an area that I have a lot of interest in. I did a lot of work in border communities when I was doing my PhD. I'm curious if you ran across in your research and in the communities with whom you've been interacting, any literature that's focusing on the male victim of intimate partner violence. I know that culturally that's a problematic construct in a number of ways. And I know that in terms of pervasiveness, it's poorly understood because the lack of reporting and the lack of resources. And I'm wondering if you had any contact with those issues as you were doing your research.
Yes, that's a great question. I think that the main takeaway that I have from the literature that I reviewed is that it is understudied, underreported, and many of the resources, like for example, ethnographic resources that I reviewed, the number of males that were victims was, maybe one out of several hundred. So I think that I've seen a lot of research with the male victims in kind of a more queer context. I don't know if that is the direction that research is going overall, but I think that the female perpetrator is something that is even less possibly understood than the male victim. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you.
Well, we only had a few minutes for question and answer. And so I think that I will call time.